Hello and welcome to another in our series of interviews and discussions with candidates who are running for statewide positions in the upcoming primary election to be held on August 9th. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, July 13th. Coming to you today on location from Founders Hall in Burton. We're very pleased to be here with Representative Charles Kimbell, who is one of the candidates running in the Democratic Party primary for Lieutenant Governor. And Representative Kimbell, a real pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for making the time for this conversation.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. And I've never been in Founders Hall here at Burton. It's beautiful.
Representative Kimbell represents a district, Windsor 5. It includes the towns of Woodstock, Reading, and Plymouth. And he has been a member of the state legislature since 2017, so he's finishing up his third term.
Right.
I guess to get us started, Representative Kimbell, tell us, why did you decide to run for the Lieutenant Governor post this year?
Well, thank you for the question. It's interesting. When Molly Gray decided she would run for U.S. Congress, it opened up a Lieutenant Governor's job. And I didn't run for the legislature with the intent on running for Lieutenant Governor. But what I found is that in my work in the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee, there's a real focus on workforce development. And there have been two major pushes, one in 2018 and again in this session. And we've been focused on the systems around workforce development. How do we guarantee that somebody coming out of high school or coming back from college can find a meaningful career? And we have some great programs in the state, but we don't necessarily have a clear path for those individuals. And I wanted to make sure that that conversation gets elevated. So to use the Lieutenant Governor's office to really have that conversation across agencies and across departments, because it's also the Department of Labor, it's the Agency of Education, it's Career and Technical Education Centers, community colleges, different agencies, the Agency of Human Services, all are involved in some form with workforce development. So that's why I decided to run, is to really elevate that conversation, to try to shape the policies and the laws that affect that part of government.
I've often thought it's surprising that the trades and vocational education have not sort of had that elevation that you mentioned in terms of trying to, open those careers to kids who are graduating from high school and encouraging them to stay in Vermont.
It's interesting. We've done a disservice, I think, to a lot of our youth by saying the only path to financial independence and success is to go to college. That is a path, but it's not the only path. And that there are plenty of very successful people in the trades that have a certificate of value of some kind and have experience, and they can start earning money right away. And so we have to make that clear that people have those options. So that's one of the things, really just trying to address either what those expectations are, and some of it's talking to the parents, it's talking to the kids at a younger age, so that we know that that's possible. So that, we're not just saying there's one path, there are many paths.
Now on your campaign website, you point out that there are 25,000 people sitting on the sidelines to rejoin the workforce. Why do you think they are on the sidelines?
Yeah, there's part of it's COVID. So let's look at COVID. And that's fewer workers than were employed in 2019. So the workforce has shrunk since then. That number might be a little lower now as to how many people are out of the workforce. One of the things is the lack of dependability of either childcare or school. So that when parents are looking at either going to work or having to stay home because their kid is now at home, one of them has to make the decision, well, I got to stay home because I don't have a reliable source for that child to go to. The second thing is when the business is closed, saying, we don't want you to have this business open right now, so you're forced to not work. It forced a lot of people to reevaluate. Is this the job that I want? Maybe people had at that point in time a pretty good 401k. Not today, but 401k at that point in time that encouraged them that maybe they could retire early, and that was the opportunity to do it. There's been a lot of teachers that have retired early. The stresses in the system have been incredible on the education system, healthcare system. So there's been a lot of people that decided to take early retirement too. So a solution to have some of those folks get back involved has to revolve around childcare, and it has to revolve around housing too. So those are the two pieces. If they can't afford, or if they can't depend on childcare, then they really can't take a job in September, October without knowing that they're going to have a reliable source of a place for their child to go during the fall. So that really cuts into people being able to go back to the workforce or to seek that out. There are plenty of openings. Last time I checked, there were 28,000 job openings in the state. And that's significant. And they're good jobs. It's not just somebody with a very entry-level position. There are jobs where we need professionals, we need managers, we need people that are skilled tradespeople. So it's all over the place, not just the hospitality sector. So there are opportunities. It's just a matter of how do we get people to be comfortable going back to work. And that's the issue, is that we're still living with COVID. We're still living with the pandemic. I know that someone was going to come to meet me today and is unable to because they just tested positive. So it's far from over. So we have to learn how to live with it more consistently. How do we adjust to do that? So it's a difficult question, and I don't think we'll really return to normal per se until we have a better way to live with COVID amongst us.
I wanted to focus a bit on two things you just mentioned there, housing and childcare.
Yeah.
They've been discussed a great deal over the past few years. What are some of your thoughts on how we can increase the housing supply? I mean, I know there's a lot of ARPA money that's being invested in that, and also on childcare. How do we get more people into those into the childcare industry, and also spur more housing development?
With housing, we did appropriate over the last two sessions about $250 million to put into housing, and there's a lot of money going into the system. So I think in 5 years you're going to see a lot more new housing that's created. We've also put in money to rehabilitate existing housing, to bring things up to code. We've put, I think it was $85 million into weatherization for existing homes. The big challenge there is we need a workforce in order to do the weatherization work, and we don't have it. So that comes back to my focus on workforce. So we do have to build new, we have to renovate existing, and then we have to look at some of the commercial structures that are not being fully used and try to convert them into housing. There's plenty of examples throughout the state where that can be done. Second floors of downtown storefronts that are not being used, maybe to their fullest capacity. Things have changed. Office space isn't in such great demand. A lot of people work from home. So we have very talented partners in the housing world in Vermont, whether it's Vermont Housing Finance Agency, some of the nonprofits that are operating, Vermont Housing Conservation Board. We just have very good partners. We need to give them a little runway. The second piece is looking at how do you maintain affordability. There's a lot of great shared equity models for home ownership that have been used in Vermont, and that is where somebody can own a home, and then as the home appreciates, and if they sell the home, they don't get 100% of the appreciation because that just continue to price other people out of the market. But they get their equity out and they get a percentage of the appreciation. So then the next person to buy the home doesn't have to pay that full market appreciated value. So it keeps it permanently affordable. So we need to do more of that. And that requires some allocation. Childcare, big conundrum. We want it to be affordable for parents. But we also want to pay the professionals what they are worth. And worth determined by, do they have an education? Do they have their own family expenses? And they do. So we've underpaid our early childhood educators for a long time. So trying to resolve that in the legislature this year, we passed it last year, and it's some incentives to both attract and retain people in the early childhood education field. It's scholarships and loan repayment. So that's part of it. But long term, trying to balance that as to where people can afford to pay. We can increase assistance, and we've done that through the Child Care Assistance Financial Program, CCFAP, I think we call it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it makes the center more sustainable. So there has to be a public and a private solution to this. Some communities have brought in their community-owned building as a way to lower the cost of administering a child care program. And that works. Does it compete with private child care providers? Sometimes there are private child care providers in publicly owned buildings, so they can lower that cost, or they can then provide some benefits to their employees. That's going on in Essex Junction. It's going on, I think, in the town of Whiting. So throughout the state, there are good examples of that. So we just need to be really creative in that field.
And that sounds similar to another area that I've heard some of the similar discussions about, and that's mental health workers. particularly with some of the recent tragedies we've been seeing, shooting incidents around the country, a lot of people pointing to the need for more mental health services for folks who need them. There are jobs that are going begging because the agencies can't afford to pay them the kind of salaries that would attract them. Any thoughts on what the solution there, or is that still the same kind of conundrum we have with childcare?
Well, a lot of it still comes back to housing. You know, can we pay people enough to afford to live here? So we really have to address that situation, which will help. I've spoken to several employers who have said that they had people ready to come to work for their company or organization in Vermont. They couldn't find housing, they didn't come. Or somebody that was working here temporary basis ended up not staying here because they couldn't afford to live here. Somebody making over $100,000 was living in a hotel because they couldn't find housing, moved out of the hotel into their car. Like, that's ridiculous that we can't have housing for both the lower priced housing, middle priced housing. We need to have both. So mental health, we have to acknowledge that the pandemic has been extremely stressful for individuals, for organizations, and that is very high. So we did in the legislature again last year provide more incentives and some scholarships for people to enter the mental health profession with some loan repayment and scholarships at the state college system, and with the hopes that that would result in more people entering the field. But I think it still comes down to that affordability question. We have a great quality of life in Vermont. People love that, but it's a question of, can I actually earn a living and save some money and put it in the bank here?
Because I was wondering if you thought one of the other issues is, does the state project itself as a state that's welcoming to businesses who might want to relocate here? But as you point out, if the housing stock is inadequate,
Yeah.
well, that's going to be a problem. But do you think the state could be doing more to attract businesses from out of state to come here and relocate? I had a conversation with another gentleman who made a point to me that he felt that the state simply wasn't welcoming to businesses that might be interested in being here. And I guess I just wondered, is that your sense of it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I have talked to all the people that are involved in economic development and throughout the state, and they fall all over themselves trying to welcome businesses to come in. Some of the time it's a lack of the right infrastructure in place. Do I have the right building? Do I have the right fiber? Do I have that in place? So that becomes a real hurdle to get over. But right now it's the availability of talent. Vermont wants new businesses. We want businesses to start and grow here. We're not always the most favorable to attract a huge business coming in with 300 or 2,000 employees, because there's always going to be a place where it costs less to do business. And so if that is the determining factor, I don't know if we'll be this competitive. I mean, we have low electricity rates when compared to the rest of New England, but not when you compare it to Texas or Arizona. So it really depends what business it is. If it's somebody that is really looking to have a place-based business that works well in Vermont, that's great. I mean, so we've had a lot of businesses really excel at that. So on the permitting side, yes, we do have to streamline some of our land use permitting to get to a quicker decision for people, a yes or a no. There's a project in Burlington that has been proposed, and they've been 3 years in trying to convert a warehouse into an entertainment space. And it's being challenged by some of the neighbors who say, this is not what we want here. And the business saying, this is not a big change of use. So I'll leave that up to the debate, but it should be an easier way to get to a yes or a no. So there are plenty of cases with that. Establishment of recreation trails, for me, is a passion of mine. That we need to make sure our outdoor recreation is strong in the state of Vermont. And it is sometimes difficult to get the permitting required in order to establish a network of trails. And not just mountain bike trails, which I'm passionate about, but other trails. Ski areas have the same kind of difficulty sometimes. So yeah, we can do more there. Part of it's personnel. Our Agency of Natural Resources is short-staffed. We need more people there. So there are solutions. They're just not, it's not that we need to change our regulations, we need to change how we process them, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the state's going to make any progress, meaningful progress on updating Act 250? You've tried over the last couple of years to do that.
Every
and
year.
It seems like it just stalemates or gets stuck somewhere in the process. And
Yeah, we made some changes this year that is favorable to forestry products industries for the location of priority housing projects in villages and neighborhood development areas, and that's going to help. I think in Manchester, and trying to meet some of the housing needs, is trying to ease some of the development requirements around housing projects, so you can go up to 50 units if it's within one of those designated areas. So that's going to be helpful. The other stuff in terms of really amending Act 250 to be more developer friendly is definitely around the permitting process. I truly believe that. We tried to change how the jurisdiction works this year to try to make that a little quicker and a little more user friendly. That was vetoed by the governor, and so that didn't make it across. And there have been many attempts over the past few years. You're right. Some of it was, we're going to change everything. Like, well, we can't change everything. Maybe we can chart incrementally. So it's been more incremental approach this year. So we'll probably see more of that in the next few years.
What do you think, another aspect to all of this that's mentioned frequently is broadband development. And I know that the state, again, is investing a lot of money, I think around $100 million in ARPA funds for broadband. Are we pushing that out fast enough, do you think, to kind of get future-proof fiber optic cable to, particularly to remote areas of the state that currently have extremely poor or even non-existent broadband service?
That's key for the economic, social, and educational, and even physical well-being of a lot of the remote areas. A lot of people are using telemedicine. So we have now communication union districts throughout the state, and some of them are really strong, and they've EC Fiber in the central part of the state has had probably the longest success rate of signing people up. So we have a lot of money allocated to it. Communication union districts, some of them are really strong and have already gone ahead and bought fiber, hanging fiber from the poles. The make-ready work is really hard. So I think we're in a good position to extend fiber to the home and to the business, which nothing is faster than the speed of light that we know of. So that's going to be the fastest. In some places of the state, we have incredibly fast internet service. Springfield is amazing. So we have to make sure we're diligent about that. We need workforce, we need people in order to do the splicing, to do all the technical work, which comes back to that issue. But I think we're going to be in a good place in a couple of years with that. We've already made some big improvements.
And another area I've heard a lot of discussion about is trying to kind of balance out, I guess, economic development across the state between rural areas and larger towns. Chittenden County obviously seems to account for a tremendous amount of the growth economically in the state, but do you feel like there is a need to kind of give a helping hand to some of the other communities, smaller towns, smaller cities around the state, in Northeast Kingdom, in southern Vermont, to kind of also enjoy that same level of economic growth and prosperity?
Yeah, I've been serving on the rural caucus in the House for the past 6 years, and we're focused on what is needed for the smallest towns in order to grow and sustain their economies. And it's really regional. And what are the economies that work well in some of the small towns? So in some places it is diversified agriculture, some places it's manufacturing, some places it's forestry products. So it really depends, and outdoor recreation is a big part with much of our tourism economy. So it really depends what those communities need and what they want to do. So it has to be driven by the communities in conjunction with the state to figure out what that community wants to be. It shouldn't be a top-down approach. It has to be really driven from the community itself as to what they want to be. It's interesting, Ludlow. Ludlow has a significant ski area there with Okemo, now owned by Vail, but 90% of the homes in the town are second homes. Would you want to change that? So a policy that you administer at the state level evenly across the state might not work in Ludlow because they're really focused to be a resort town in support of Okemo. Do they want to change that? Maybe. So I think it's making sure that those resources are available from the state and regional level to support what's going on.
And what about climate change and environment issues? I mean, the legislature came close to passing the clean heat standard this past term.
Yeah.
Fell short by one vote to overturn the governor's veto there. What was your thought on that clean heat standard? It was very controversial. I know that a lot of people felt it was flawed in one way or another. Do you think, if you were elected lieutenant governor, would you be urging your legislative colleagues to kind of tweak that bill a little bit to see if you could get it over the line next year?
Well, we have to look at it in a grand scale. So the climate action plan that came out in December of last year had over 240 recommendations. It's a long list. Clean heat standard was one of them. A big part of it, but one of them. So that a particular structure didn't work with the governor, and so, okay, let's try something else. So we have to go back and try something else that might be more easy to work. Clean heat standard did have that series of credits. Really the focus was on the distributors and the wholesalers, not necessarily on the consumers, but trying to drive that practice to consumers. So there's not uniform agreement among the fuel oil dealers as to was that a good thing or a bad thing. Some said this is great, the small one said this ain't so great. So we have to take another swing at it and see what else could work. So home heating fuels take up over 40% of whatever the greenhouse gas emissions are emitted into the atmosphere. So solving for that particular area is crucial. For me, it comes back to weatherization of homes to improve the condition under which people live, more comfortable, saves them money. There are some creative financial structures to help people pay for that weatherization work, and then even adding it to their utility bill. There are some microgrid technologies that we should be exploring. Green Mountain Power is exploring that. So you have solar panels on your roof, you have a battery, you charge your car, and then how does it integrate with the local grid? So there are some very good ideas that we need to fully flesh them out. But for me, I think the biggest one is weatherization of homes. We need to invest in workforce. There's already a proposal to come up with a standard curriculum and certifications and licensing along different lines. We need to advance that in the next legislative session.
So let me just pivot then to something we almost talked about a moment ago, and that's the question of gun safety. Do you feel like where the state is at this point in terms of its rules and regulations around guns and gun safety is an adequate enough place, or should we do more in terms of red flag laws or even bans on certain types of weapons for people?
Yeah, Vermont has a proud tradition of responsible gun ownership, but we've made some real progress towards providing more gun safety legislation. So we already have extreme risk protection orders in the red flag. You have to be 21 to purchase a firearm, universal background checks, removal of firearms in the case of a domestic dispute. So we have, and then trying to close a Charleston loophole, and we've limited magazine capacity to 10 rounds. So that is far ahead of where other states are. But we have to recognize that the leading cause of death from firearms is by suicide. It's 88% of all firearm deaths in the state are by suicide. So we can do more there. We can do more to protect people that are in that vulnerable position. Secure safety is a reasonable request to make sure that firearms are secured in a home or wherever they may be. And then also instituting a waiting period makes sense. I don't know if it needs to be 48 hours or 72. The legislature's got to figure that out so that if somebody is 21 years old, they pass a background check, but they're also in a vulnerable position that they have to wait. And often that momentary requirement that you wait is enough to get someone to reconsider and not move ahead with a suicidal action. So those are some of the things immediately that we can look at and do. In terms of military-style weapons, it's really important to have to define what that is. And the 1994 law that banned assault rifles had over 600 specific weapons recognized in that bill. So it is possible to do, you just have to make sure you go through that work of doing it, because you can't say one that looks like an assault weapon. That's not enough. You really have to say, does it have a high exchange capacity, and so something can be quickly exchanged from one magazine to another. So some of that has to be ironed out when we're talking about those assault weapons. there's no place for assault weapons in civilized states. So we have to look at that while still recognizing a strong tradition there.
Because one of the other things I've heard recently is that a lot of folks who are drug trafficking from Massachusetts and other states come to Vermont, and because Vermont has a more relaxed approach to it, makes it easier for people to obtain these guns. They trade guns for drugs, and that's driving some of the drug trafficking in the state. So I wondered if that might be an argument for, saying, hey, well, we need to make it more difficult somehow or another.
Yeah, it may be. We've got the corridor of 91 and 93 coming into the state, which is kind of where the drugs are coming from downcountry. So you look at what you have to do in order to address both of those things. Prevention, enforcement, treatment, when you're looking at drug issues. Can we prevent people from actually developing dependency on drugs? We can do that, either through education or also by regulating how many drugs can get prescribed, and we've done that. How many pills can get prescribed for an operation, so that's currently in place. And enforcement, yes, we could do more in enforcement, as long as it's done with an eye towards being fair and impartial. And then in terms of treatment, we have to make sure that we treat people that have a substance use disorder as they have an issue. It's not that they're a criminal, they have an issue that we can be more humane about and treat. So I think we have to look at this whole issue of drugs and weapons as part of a larger social issue that we have to solve.
Okay. And just before we have to run here, it seems like the lieutenant governor position is kind of, I won't say uniquely situated, but close to that to be able to kind of have conversations between parties of both sides. That you are in a position where you can talk to all 3 or 4 parties in the state house and try to achieve a consensus. And I guess I just wondered, as we look around the country, it seems like there's an awful lot of polarization and division going on. Do you have any sense as to how we might be able to overcome that? I mean, that's a complicated question. We could probably spend half an hour talking about that all by itself. But I just wondered, do you feel like there's something that we're just not understanding correctly about how we can discuss differences across ideological fences with each other?
It's a great challenge that we face as a nation, as being able to just have a civil conversation with people and recognize them for being a person with a different viewpoint. Too often people get angry immediately once they sense that somebody's from a different viewpoint. And we have to get back to a better level of civil discourse. So the shouting from the extremes is deafening. So often those voices in the middle are just drowned out. So I think we need to continue to work from that middle place, because that's where the work actually gets done. So it's being able to have conversations with either side, but trying to establish common ground. That is really what I think our secret to success has been as a country, and I think what we can do in Vermont too.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there for today, Representative Kimbell, but thank you again very much for making the time for this conversation. I really appreciate that, and I hope all of you out there have found it an interesting and informative discussion. We will have a few more discussions with other statewide candidates coming up before we wrap things up, probably at some point next week. And again, a reminder, the primary is coming up on August 9th, but you can vote early. You can vote now if you want. Go up to your town hall and talk to your town clerk, or go to the Secretary of State's My Voter page, and you can get all the information you need there. So the most important thing to do is vote.
Yes.
All right. Thank you again, Representative Kimbell.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure.
And we'll see you all again next time. Thank you very much.